Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Ahmadai Shakur. So this gentleman here was kind enough to do a video calling people of my skin tone racist and saying that we have nothing to be complained about in 2023. So I have a response to that, so let's get into it.
Those live videos of some very racist black people, you could call them black supremacists. They don't want anything to do with white people. They want to be completely separated from white people. They want to build their own cities. They don't want anything to do with white people. Or anyone not black, actually. And this is something that I found many years ago on Twitter. They called it Black Twitter. They probably call it Black TikTok, too.
It's always interesting when someone like him comes out and says something about people of my skin tone wanting to separate and not be around them when they had Jim Crow, okay? They had segregation. Our ancestors had to fight against it so that they could be accepted into places and spaces with them. Okay, they didn't want to live around us, and some of them still don't, but he's not talking about that. He wants to talk about us as if there's something wrong with some of our people not wanting to live around them. But here's the thing. Some of them don't want to live around people who look like him because they're tired of being discriminated against. They're tired of dealing with racism, okay? They're tired of oppression, okay? Please pay attention. He also said that people of my skin tone have absolutely nothing to be complaining about in 2023. Well, who is he, first of all, to tell us what we should or shouldn't be complaining about? He doesn't know how it is to be us, to walk in our shoes, to live in the skin that we're in. Neither do we know how it is to be him. So he can't speak for us. He sounds ridiculous. And also, he's upset because some of us complain. Well, in the Bible it says, surely oppression maketh a wise man mad, and a gift destroyeth the heart. Okay, please pay attention. And since he brought up racism, well, let's talk about it, because at the end of the day, what's the definition of it? Well, it says the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Okay, so I'm sorry, we are not able to be racist because we don't think that we're superior to anyone. You see, our ancestors and us still today are fighting for equality. So how could the people who are fighting for equality be the same people who feel superior to anyone else? I'm sorry, that makes no sense. And furthermore, when he's saying that we have nothing to complain about in 2023, well, here's a sign from Jim Crow. It says we want white tenants in our white community. But this is a story from 2023, okay? The same thing, okay? A woman of my skin tone suing her landlord after he tried to evict her and allegedly said he'd rather put a white family in this unit. I'm sorry, we've nothing to complain about. Please sit down somewhere, sir. You don't know what you're talking about. It's really sad. He also said that my people complain about being deleted by the police while unarmed, but that more of his people, in fact, are deleted by the police unarmed. Well, that's not true. You see, more of his people are absolutely deleted by the police, but it's not while they're unarmed. They're usually carrying a weapon and they engage the police in a violent manner. They're trying to fight them, trying to harm them, and things of that nature. At the end of the day, also, there's 76% of the population, whilst we're 13, so they say. I actually believe we're more, but nonetheless, they're the majority. There's much more of them, so yes, more of them would lose their lives to the police.
Hello, what's up everyone? How are you doing? I'm hoping that you're doing super great from wherever you're watching us from. As you know, this is your presenter, Jintuk Stories, and I'm hoping that you are great. Now, there's something that I want to talk about that I feel like it's important, and we need to, have a great discussion in regards to this. For the longest time, a lot of atrocities were done to black people, and some just went like that without black people talking about this. And now we have professors like Dr. Creswell Singh, who talks about why black people should always make sure to not really revenge, but make sure that they know what they did to them by first knowing your history, knowing who you are, and how all these things were done to you. Now, for centuries, white societies have benefited from the enslavement, colonization, and exploitation of black people. Look, from transatlantic slave trade to apartheid and Jim Crow, black suffering helped build white wealth and dominance. The legacy of this exploitation is inescapable. Many white people, even if they haven't personally committed these acts, carry the psychological inheritance of this history. Why? Some white folks are still living or enjoying the structures that was built, right, to favor white people as compared to black people, right? Some white folks are inheriting wealth that was built by black ancestors. So all these culminates down to what is called historical guilt, and the guilt itself leads to fear, right? Because when you're guilty, you fear that something that you did to someone can or could be done to you. Now, if one knows even subconsciously that they have wronged someone, they naturally have expectation that the wronged party will seek revenge if given the chance. This becomes a projected fear. If I were them, I will retaliate, right? That's how they think. It's a projected fear. This is especially intense because the scale of historical harm is so vast. And the fact that they try to imagine this and they still seeing the same people, some of them living with them in the same neighborhood, makes them even more guilty, which leads to more fear. So all these things happen. As a result, we can trace it in history, psychology, sociology, and power dynamic. And I'll tell that it isn't simply about fear, right? But it reflects a collective anxiety tied to guilt, historical memory, and the fragile foundation of racial hierarchies. And so for me, I'm trying to just give you a deep critical perspective about all this. Now I want us to watch this and then I'll be back. For those watching us for the first time, kindly consider subscribing to the channel, joining our membership, and really get so we can offer you. But until then, as you know, these are presented Generic Stories. For those who are supporting me for the first time, I'll most definitely appreciate you. You can, support me through my Cash App, through Super Thanks. I definitely appreciate it. For those who are supporting the work that I'm doing, I'm also appreciative. So let's watch the video. I'll be back with my commentary as usual.
But like I said, it's usually warranted because they have weapons and they're usually doing something. They're not just innocently at a traffic stop complaining and then they get deleted. Okay, that's not what happens. This is absolutely nefarious.
This isn't good for the country. It's not good for Americans. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X did a lot to bring equality to black people in this country. I'm sorry for what happened many years ago. I'm actually not sorry because I didn't do it. But, I'm sorry on behalf of America that we had that history. But get over it.
Now, in the one breath, he says he's sorry for America's history. And then he tells us in the next breath to get over it. Well, he would never tell these people in the picture to get over it, and nor should they. They should always remember the atrocities that were perpetuated upon their people, and as should we. Because you see, if you don't learn from your history, and if you forget your history, you may likely be doomed to repeat it. Please pay attention. He also brought up Dr. King and Malcolm X saying that they fought for equality for our people. Well, our people have never gotten that equality. Okay, we still don't have equality till this day. That's why racism still exists. Okay. Also, we don't have hate groups. We don't have hate groups that have gone around for centuries subjugating people, oppressing people, lynching them, ethnic intimidation being used as a tactic, or any of those things. We've never burned down their towns. We've never destroyed their homes. We've never done many of the things. We didn't cause race riots and any of those things. And so it's very interesting that he's complaining about us and anything that we say or do. He can't make that make sense. We've never mocked them. Okay. At the end of the day, you can see in this photo clearly, okay, they're mocking us. So he needs to probably go and follow my friends, Walt Kelly and Dixon White, okay? And as well as Jolly Good Ginger and Tizzy ENT. Okay, maybe he could learn something.
You can't tell me that black people can't be racist.
Racism and prejudice are often used interchangeably, especially by whites. And to me, it's a signal that we don't really understand the discussion or the conversation about race. Because racism is the belief that one's race is superior to another's, coupled with the ability to oppress or discriminate based upon that belief. For example, a black person may be prejudiced against me as a white person, but that prejudice may be based upon past experiences, but often that prejudice would not have a component of superiority. They may not trust me, but they don't believe that they are superior than me because they are black and I am white. So in America, given our history and our makeup right now, it makes sense only to talk about whites being racist. Blacks can be prejudiced, whites can be prejudiced, but as far as racism goes, it's whites in America that harbor the racist sentiment.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Absolutely no lies detected. If he doesn't listen to me, maybe he'll listen to him. Okay? TikTok, this is for entertainment purposes only.
I was taught that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery. If it had not been that way, there would not have been any slaves anywhere in America for Robert E. Lee or anybody else to have owned. So don't blame Robert E. Lee. Maybe you should be after your ancestors.
Communism slowly destroys a nation by removing all icons, such as Aunt Jemima's face from pancake mix, Civil War statues, other things like historical school names.
It says in the Bible, Jesus himself never condemned slavery. In fact, he said slaves have an obligation to obey their master.
I heard a lot of racist things as I stood because I think some of you good people thought I was one of you, but I'm not. So I'm here to say that all of this does make a difference. You are speaking from your white culture and your white self.
That the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery.
Okay, so if you haven't seen this video, please go back and watch it in its entirety, because it's always interesting when I hear people using that same talking point that Susan is using, okay? She says that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold their people into slavery. Well, here's the thing. The African kings did, some of them, sell their people into slavery, but here's the reason. The people came there with guns, and they didn't have guns, and they did so under the threat of death. Now, that's the part they conveniently always seem to leave out. They didn't just willingly do it for money or anything like that. It was under the threat of death. They decapitated some of those African kings' heads and posted them publicly for everyone to see as an intimidation tactic. Okay, and also they lied about what they were going to do to the people when they brought them here. Okay, they basically acted like they were going to treat them so nice and all of that. They didn't know anything about chattel slavery. And then there's another man in that same video who talks about how in the Bible, even Jesus agreed with slavery and said that you should obey your masters. Well, here's the thing. That's all just a load of BS. Now, anyone with an ounce of sense knows that the Bible has been transliterated numerous of times, and that there are many things that are, translated in the wrong way. There's things that are added in there just to paint narratives for certain people's benefit and for the oppression of others. Okay, at the end of the day, here's what I want him to make sense of. If he's saying that Jesus thought slavery was fine, well, what about when God spoke to Moses at the burning bush? Okay, let's talk about that. When God spoke to Moses at the burning bush and said to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go, and if he did not, then he would send the plagues upon them. And when Pharaoh refused, what did God do? Well, God sent the plagues upon them according to the story. So I'm sorry, why isn't he quoting that part of it? At the end of the day, people want to use all of these, talking points to try to push their narrative and agenda and to make it seem as though it's perfectly fine, the low down dirty things that are done to people of my skin tone. But at the end of the day, they're not telling the whole truth, and they never do, because you see, the whole truth doesn't fit the narrative, okay? This is what's going on in Florida. And you have Governor Ron DeSantis to thank for that, okay? Please pay attention. The last thing we need is someone like him, and with his mindset and ideology and bigoted ways and views and racist thoughts and ideology, the last thing we need is someone like him in the White House, okay? Please make it all make sense.
I was taught that the chiefs of the tribes in Africa sold.
Once again, here we go. Do you think that black people literally wanted to come here and to do or to act as slaves? They probably had their own way of life. They probably were doing things they wanted to do. I don't understand, if people were sold into slavery and they were in Africa, why did they have to come to this land to be treated so poorly and to continue the poorness of your character? Tells you something about this world and the world we live in the United States that we live in. Why not educate people about themselves? I never knew a lot about my family history. I had to go dig up some things. I had to go, scratch my way through Ancestry to find the people that who I was like. I didn't know why I had these different issues, or I was upset, or all these things, because no one ever taught us. Think about being away from your own land and then put into another land and then being treated as if that's what you deserve. Now the reverse psychology is that now white people, white European people, are afraid of black people, when we used to be terrified of the European individuals. I call it just absolute betrayal, in the sense that you don't want people to know the truth about where they come from. We know about every other nationality. We can read it, we can see it, it is evident. But to understand the deep core where you come from is inevitable. You have to go deep, for it's a needle in the haystack, and you have to burn the haystack to get down to the needle. I say this, it is nothing wrong with educating people. How is that going to change the fact that we still want to live, breathe, act, and be ourselves? Tell me what that is.
Never condemn slavery. In fact, he said slaves have an...
And this is why you should not be a Christian young black man, because Jesus never condemned slavery, and he said you shall obey your earthly masters. Have a good day.
My family fought to save their farm under this flag.
Who was working that farm?
My family was.
Who was working the farm?
They were poor. Do you know how much a slave cost back then?
There's actually a knowable answer to that question. By 1860, at the time of the Civil War, enslaved people's value was somewhere between $200 on the low end, all the way up to $2,000. So we're talking about, in today's dollars, maybe somewhere between $2,400 and, like $50,000. There are even some estimates that say that some enslaved people were valued at somewhere around $180,000 in today's dollars. So you can think of it basically like owning a car. And about 1.6% of Southern families owned more than 200 slaves, like having like a whole car dealership. But about 20 to 25% of Southerners at the time of the Civil War owned at least one enslaved person. It's like basically living in a society where wealthy people all have cars. Well, what do all the people who don't have cars want? A car. And even if a family worked on a small farm and didn't have enslaved people, what do you think their goal was? Their goal was to earn enough money to be able to buy people, to buy humans to do the work. It's not like families didn't aspire to have enslaved people. Why do you think that Southern whites were willing to go to war, to literally go to war against the United States for slavery? Because remember, every single state that seceded, all 11 of them, said explicitly, we're doing this to preserve slavery. Well, why would somebody who's on a small farm want to fight to preserve slavery? Because their aspiration was to become a major planter, which means a major slave owner. That's what they all wanted to do. That's what they all aspired to do. And they also wanted to defend the system whereby they couldn't be enslaved. Only Africans could, only black people. And so that system of hierarchy that allowed any white person, no matter how rich or poor, to be superior to any black person, and for that black person to be captured and treated as property, and their children and their children's children owned by a white person. This is a system that benefited every single white person in the South. And by the way, every white person in the North too. Because even if you weren't a slave owner, you benefited from the economy that cotton production, that rice production, that all of these industries generated. You could benefit by being an insurance owner. Slaves were insured like cars. Enslaved people also produced goods that were sold. So if you were somebody who was in the shipping business or, the cotton milling business, all of them benefited from slavery. So whether you were a small farmer or a big farmer, the slavery system benefited you. And you were willing to go to war to preserve it and to preserve white supremacy, because that was the whole basis of your society. And by the way, a lot of people in the South went to war simply because they were told to, and because the rich people around them made sure that the poor kids were doing the fighting, right? And so it doesn't matter whether your family was rich, poor, had one slave or 10 or none. It doesn't matter. Everyone in the South benefited from that economy and that system, and they went to war to preserve it and to preserve white supremacy forever. So that's the answer to your question. You also told on yourself just by saying that at all, because, like, why are you curious about how much they cost? You missed that system, right? You think things were better then? One last note, that flag is not even the flag that your forefathers fought under for their farm. That was not the flag of the Confederacy. That's a flag that they created afterwards. It's literally just a symbol of racism and white supremacy. And you're flying it because MAGA. Peace out.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel, and just hope that you are doing super great. I'm hoping that you are okay and fine and super well. Now, I'm gonna be talking about some things because, well, if you are a person who has been doing wrong things, definitely you know that you could have asked for revenge just like any other person, because nobody wants to be done wrong, and that's the truth. That's happened with a lot of people to begin with. Now, the myth of violent black person. Western media, political propaganda, and racist pseudoscience have for centuries painted black people, especially black men, as inherently violent, dangerous, and uncivilized. This dehumanization serves two purposes. First, it justifies controlling, policing, and oppressing black communities. Two, it amplifies the white fear that if black people gain power, they will use it violently against whites. Ironically, the myth of black violence makes white people more afraid, even though most racial violence historically and currently is white on black than black on white. But propaganda distorts reality. Just like what Jack Lang was trying to do the other day. He's trying to push an agenda by making white people go out in the streets saying that even white lives matter. Of course, every lives matter. But let's take a minute and look at history. How many people have how many people have been disadvantaged between black and white people? When you try to look at the population and getting the disparity, now you get to understand from the perspective that I talk about. So it's just an amplification of fear. That's why they try to seem to see them as violent, and this shows the down fear that they have towards them, that they can retaliate anytime. And all the stereotypic things that they're saying, it is a projection of fear that they're always trying to project to you. Now, I'm also going to be talking about fear of losing power, not just safety. Black retaliation is not just feared as violent retribution. It is also feared in terms of systemic change. White supremacy depends on maintaining economic, political, and cultural control. If black people were to retaliate by gaining power through politics, business, or cultural influence, it threatens the very structure of whiteness as dominance. You'll agree with me. You'll agree with me. Look at the Tulsa massacre. Look what happened. This is all a reflection of white fear. Because they fear when black people thrive, that's all gonna happen. They fear that black people might segregate with them anytime. It's also a fear because they're gonna be losing customers. They're gonna be losing the money because they got no people that will be buying from them apart from black people. You get to realize that America is a consumerism. America practices consumerism culture, and this is what has always been pushed towards the American citizens, including especially blacks of the United States. So this means that when they are delineated or separated or segregated from black people, they'll not get the chance to, get to have people that used to buy from them like it used to be. Also going to be talking about black forgiveness versus white anxiety. Historically, black communities have shown remarkable restraint and forgiveness. Despite slavery, lynchings, redlining, and mass incarceration, there has been a large-scale black revenge movement. And many civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, who also preached nonviolence and reconciliation. Yet, white anxiety still persists. Why? Because it's not about how black people actually behave, but about how white people own fear of justice, feeling punished. Justice threatens flip the hierarchy. And that's how it is. That's how it looks. Because look, Dr. Creswell Singh, if you know her, she's an African American psychiatrist who talks about that black people, we are always first in forgetting. But all we need to do, we need to deal with things the way they're supposed to be dealing with. Martin Luther King Jr. also talked about this. Malcolm X also talked about this. Sometimes justice is not just asked. Sometimes you need to take justice in your own hands. And this includes standing for your own self as a black person. And that's one thing that I hope we all get to learn. I'm going to be talking about white fragility and denial at the same time. When you talk about white fragility, you know somebody called Robin DiAngelo. Yes, she's the author of definitely white fragility. Robin DiAngelo calls this fear white fragility, an inability to tolerate even mild challenges to racial comfort. For some white people, even naming racism feels like an attack. Any suggestion of black empowerment becomes threatening because it destabilizes their sense of innocence and control. Also, this fragility reinforces what is called fear. If we admit we are wrong, they will hate us. This mindset blocks true healing. I'll talk about cultural memory of uprising. White fear, sorry about that. White fear also stalked by historical events where black people did resist. First, the Haitian Revolution of 1791, where enslaved Africans overthrew their French oppressors. Nat Turner's Rebellion, 1831, the Black Power Movement, 1960s to 1970s, the recent uprising after police killing Dr. George Floyd, that was around 2019, 2020, right? These events are often exaggerated or misinterpreted by white society to justify fear. Even though they were defensive, not offensive, the memory of resistance becomes a warning. This could happen again. Let me talk about the Django effect. There's a pop culture component too. Films like Django Unchained and Black Panther tap into white anxieties by showing what black power might look like in an alternate universe. While many viewers find these stories empowering, some white viewers see them as threatening fantasies. What if the oppressed got a taste of vengeance? Just like how that will feel. That is what we call the Django effect. I'm also going to talk about racism as a projection. And finally, we must understand that racism often operates through projection. If you build a system on domination and cruelty, you expect others to do the same when you give them a chance. This projection of violence, domination, and resentment onto black people is white supremacy sustaining itself. If it shifts attention away from white guilt onto black bodies, then you know what's going to happen. That's where the fear comes from, right? And as you know, these represent Judoc stories. I'm hoping this was so educative to you, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.